Good evening. Welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study. We are back in the new year for more online studies. And this time, I have decided that we are going to work on the book of Revelation. Probably the strangest and most misunderstood book in all of the scripture. And there are a few things that, as we begin to study, I just want you all to know right off the bat. And the number one thing is this. And if you get nothing else from this class, this is what I want you to remember. There is not an S at the end of Revelation. It is not Revelations. There's only one revelation. And the reason that this is so important is not just because it bothers me. You know how everybody has things that they mispronounce and it bothers you whenever you hear it said wrong, but that it really gets to the heart of what is happening in Revelation, is that this is one revelation that John is receiving. This is not a whole bunch of sort of strung together visions. These aren't things that he had over weeks and days that he sort of cobbled together. He is presenting this as one vision, as one revelation. This is going to be really important. This book was not written to be read. This book was written to be heard. And so one thing that I, right off the bat, am going to encourage everybody to do is this. Sometime in the next week or two, find an audiobook recording. You can find them on YouTube. You can get that through the library or through an app or something like that. But find an audio recording of the book of Revelation. And then listen to it all the way through. I found one online. It'll be about an hour. You can, if you have to drive to the city sometime this week, you can listen to the entire book of Revelation, because that is how the original hearers of the book would have encountered it. They would have had it read to them. Most people in the time that it was written did not read. They couldn't have read it. Also, this is a world that doesn't have a whole lot of visual media. There were buildings, there were paintings or mosaics or something like that, but there certainly wasn't television or movies or anything like that. People were not accustomed to learning with their eyes. They were accustomed to learning with their ears. And so a lot of the images that John creates, that John makes in his story, are meant to be heard and sort of played out in the mind's eye. And that's why a lot of the pictures that are drawn in Revelation don't really make a whole lot of sense. I mean, right towards the beginning, we have this picture of Jesus with a sword coming out of his mouth. But then in the same picture, in the same area, Jesus actually speaks. Now, how do you speak with the sword coming out of your mouth? Well, that's because the image is more evocative. It's not about being, thinking about these things as painting a picture exactly so much as it creates images and associations and feelings within your brain. You can think of it as a radio drama. You can think of it as a description. But in this case, the drawing of the pictures does more than just create an image in your head. It creates feeling. It creates association. As always, when you're studying a book of the Bible, it's good to think about why this book was written and who it was written to and who it was written by. We're going to get one thing out of the way really quick. A lot of people through the ages have associated this book with the Gospel of John and the three letters of John. I did a study on the three letters of John a few months ago. I'm very, very familiar with the letters of John. Revelation was not written by that same John. Revelation was not written by, one of the 12 disciples, and Revelation was not written by whoever it was, related to that John or not, who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. part of the reason we know this is because Revelation as a book is one of the most difficult to translate. It's not written by somebody who used Greek as their primary language. More likely than not, this is somebody that spoke Hebrew or spoke Aramaic. And in his mind, when he was writing in Greek, he was always sort of translating from Aramaic or Hebrew. And so you get these kind of oddities in the Greek original text. And that's just one reason that most people don't think that this was written by the same John as others. Now, in later times, when most people weren't reading in Greek, and it at the beginning it said that it was written by John, people just assumed, okay, this is probably the same John as wrote the others, and for a lot of people that association just sort of stuck, and that's fine. But a good scholar is going to see that these are not the same. John, very common name. It's a very common name now. It was a very common name back then. And so this is just some other, Christian of a later time whose name was John. And apparently the people that he wrote to knew who he was. Who was he writing to? Well, he actually says this right at the very beginning of the book. He says he's writing to 7 churches that are in Asia. Asia is kind of a weird word. The Roman province of Asia was actually what we would now consider Western Turkey. This was a real strong hotbed of Christianity in the early days. And you can sort of imagine why, which is, if you have a map of the Mediterranean world and the Roman Empire and things like that, and okay, so here's the sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Well, over here you're going to have Israel. Up here you're going to have Rome. In between, you're going to have to go through Turkey if you're like walking around. And so as the gospel was spreading out from Israel, and especially it was spreading through the Roman world, Turkey is a good first stop. There's also a crossroads of the world. There is a lot of difference between Roman, European culture and Palestinian and Israel and Near Eastern culture, Semitic culture. Turkey, Asia was a place where these cultures could mix a little bit more than they could in other parts. In Turkey, for instance, it was a pretty good place to be a Jew. Jewish communities were really strong in that area, and they had a little bit of a status. They had been around for a long time, and that was kind of considered cool. They didn't cause much trouble. It was good to be Jewish. You didn't cause much trouble. And you were good to do business with, and that sort of thing. And also they had this sort of weird protective status because the deal that had been worked out was that the Jews were they were not required to worship the emperor. Most places you were required to worship the emperor as a god, basically. But the Jewish people were so against this that, it was worked out that instead you can just say prayers for the emperor. And as long as you said prayers for the emperor, then we're good. So it makes sense that this is a Jewish stronghold. It's a cosmopolitan place. Makes sense that this is a good place for Christianity to spread. And so by the time of John, of the book of Revelation, we have 7 churches, or at least 7 major churches that he's writing to in Asia. But things started to get not so good for Christians later. Probably the turning point in the history of both Judaism and Christianity is when the Romans finally destroyed the temple in the year 70. And after the temple was destroyed, a lot of things happened. First of all, the Jewish people didn't really care for Rome anymore. You always had some Jews that were sort of comfortable with Rome, and after this, no one's really comfortable with Rome anymore. They've destroyed the temple, and so Rome gets started to be called the new Babylon. Babylon was the empire from old that had finally destroyed the first temple and had carried off the Jewish people into enslavement for a long time and into exile. And so now Rome has come and they have destroyed the temple again. They are the new Babylon. Because we don't have a temple anymore, the Jewish people sort of had to reconfigure their life. This is the beginning of really what we would call modern Judaism. Modern Judaism isn't structured around a temple. Modern Judaism is structured around synagogues and meeting and learning and carrying on these traditions. And this was starting to take place during the time that John wrote Revelation, which, by the way, could have been written anywhere from 70 years to 100 years AD or in the current era. We don't really know. But Jews are starting to think about what it means to be Jewish. And because of that, they start being really a lot more harsh on heresies, let's say. So people that aren't practicing Judaism right, they sort of get shunned by the rest of the Jewish community, including Christians. Christians, it was finally decided, were not really following Judaism right. And this is a period of quite a bit of animosity between Christians and Jews. Not uniform, but in a lot of places they're not getting along very well right now. Part of the reason for this is that Christians have become an easy scapegoat in the Roman Empire. And a lot of that has to do with this guy Nero. And we're going to be talking about Nero probably quite a bit as we study the book of Revelation. Nero, who actually died in the year 68, so even before the temple was destroyed, Nero really enjoys this idea of being worshipped as a god. Some of the other Roman emperors just kind of let it happen. Some of them were sort of shy about it. Nero really likes it. He likes being worshipped as a god, and Christians and Jews are not going to worship him as a god. Nero also he was a failed urban planner. He tried to make the city of Rome look a lot better. And so he provided for a lot of construction to happen in Rome. But then it all caught on fire. And of course, you have the famous image of Rome fiddling of Nero fiddling while Rome burns. And when it was all done, he tried to scapegoat the Jews, but at the time, the Jews were still pretty respected in Rome, and so that didn't work. And he said, no, I didn't mean all the Jews, I meant the Christians. And so the Christians are fed to the mob and fed to the lions and all these things. And so Nero becomes this really terrifying figure for the Christians. And after Nero died, apparently by his own hand, the rumor got around that he had actually escaped and that he was building armies out in the east and he was going to come again. And this was terrifying to think that this mad emperor who, would blame anyone else for his problems would run off and come back with a vengeance. So it's scary times. And then add to this that during the 60s, earthquakes were rocking the Roman world. Then add to this, all the way in the year 79, there was a volcano that went off and destroyed the city of Pompeii. Volcanoes, earthquakes, mobs, persecution from all edges. People were pretty terrified. When things get tough for Christians and Jews, and actually other people, other religious and ethnic groups during the time, they turn to particular types of writing. And one of these types of writing is called apocalypse. And so as we think about what the genre of the book of Revelation would be, we have to examine what this word apocalypse means. Most of the time, nowadays, we think of apocalypse as just meaning the end of the world or some great big battle that's going to happen. Or we talk about things being apocalyptic, meaning big explosions and wastelands and entire cities being destroyed. I mean that's what we call apocalyptic. Um, but apocalypse is really, in its original phrase, it is just a type of story or a type of writing. Um, all of you are familiar with prophecy. Prophecy in the Hebrew scriptures is not so much about predicting the future. It's not saying like these things are going to happen in the future. Prophecy deals more with interpreting the present and giving shape to the future. And so it's a way of explaining what is happening now in theological terms. Everyone can look outside and see that it's raining, but you turn to a weatherman who can tell you that this rain is part of a system, and the system is going to be moving out, or no, this winter is going to be a particularly rainy one, and so it's just going to be rainy all the time. Well, that's kind of how prophets act. It's not just that they say it's going to rain or it is raining, but they explain why. And so, for John begins Revelation by saying that he's a prophet. It starts right at the very beginning that in verse 3, blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of the prophecy. So this is a letter containing prophecy, and the prophecy is apocalyptic. Apocalypse, let's back up a little bit about what apocalypse means. You know what providence means. Providence is a word that we say about God, and all it really means is that God is, in some sense, on some level, the author of history. What is happening in the world is guided, is led by, is held up by God. God kind of knows where things are going. God is guiding the future. And, we don't have to know exactly how that works or the ins and outs of exactly how God does that. But the future is being driven by God. Now, underneath the idea of providence, we could talk about eschatology. That's a really kind of funny word, eschatology. But eschatology has to do specifically with the idea of ends. And not just ends in terms of time, but ends in terms of goals or ultimate meaning. Eschatology is basically a way of saying not only is God driving history, but God is driving history towards a particular destination. And so I might have a particular destination, humanity might have a particular destination, the world might have a particular destination, the entire universe might have a particular destination. And all of those, what's my goal, what's the universe's goal, all of those get wrapped up into this idea of eschatology. And Revelation absolutely deals with eschatology. Revelation talks about the end of the world. There's no getting around it. Like the entire heavens are going to be dismantled by the time we get to the end of Revelation. So Revelation is absolutely a book about eschatology. Now, in that, what does apocalypse mean? Well, apocalyptic literature says that not only is there eschatology, not only is God driving us to an end, but that end is coming really soon. This is where it becomes so important to understand why Revelation was written when it was. If you're told that the end of the world is coming soon, that's not necessarily a comforting thought. But when the world is going crazy and you're being persecuted on every side and there are volcanoes and earthquakes and all these things going on, hearing that there is an end and it's soon is a lot more comforting. And so apocalyptic literature often crops up during times of great distress. And what it does is every time in apocalyptic literature, it starts with things are bad now. And we're going to get this in Revelation because Revelation begins with letters to all these different churches, and it's saying that things are bad right now. But Apocalypse always says that then things are going to get worse, and then things are going to get worse, and then things are going to get worse. But then at the end, God's going to make everything good. So Apocalypse is a way of telling us to be strong, to persevere during hard times, because God is going to make things good pretty soon. By the way, what does apocalypse mean? It literally means to unveil something. You pull the veil off of something so that you can see what's underneath or see what's beyond. Or in other words, apocalypse is a revelation. And really, the revelation to John, this last book of the Bible, should be called the Apocalypse of John. That's a much better word. And people wouldn't add an S to the end of it all the time and really drive me crazy. Now, it's difficult to understand the language that's used in this apocalypse, partially because we're no longer in a time where people just assume that the end is coming next week. There's a sense that all of the New Testament is apocalyptic, in that Paul and a lot of the other people of the time, they really did think that the end was coming soon. I think a lot of scholars think that towards the end of Paul's career, he started imagining that this, the end wasn't necessarily coming really, really soon. Maybe it was going to be a little bit longer, a little bit further away. But for the most part, it seems like the writers in the New Testament kind of thought that the end really was coming soon. And so that leads to a very different assumption about the world and a very different interpretation of the events that are surrounding. And it leads to a very different sort of language. Probably the biggest confusion about Revelation is, what does it mean? Like it's kind of fun to read. I mean, it's exciting. Things happen. The stars fall from the sky. People get blown to smithereens. I mean, it has everything. No wonder there's a whole book series that's about Revelation that's just like really gripping to read, because it's sort of exciting. But what does it mean scripturally? What are we supposed to do with this? And so we need to be careful about how we understand the language that Revelation uses. And most of us agree, it's not literal language. This is nothing in Revelation, or at least the main thrust of Revelation, is supposed to be interpreted, literally. Maybe parts of it, but certainly not all of it. It's also, I want to kind of warn you away from taking it too figuratively or allegorically. Because I think that's sort of a cop-out. A lot of people, if they can't take the Bible exactly literally, they're going to jump way to the other end. They're going to say, "Oh, it's all a metaphor. It's all an allegory. It means something else." Because there's a sense there that if you take it to be too allegorical, it doesn't really mean anything. If you say, well, it's all just a metaphor, it doesn't really mean much of anything. We also don't want to think of Revelation as a code. A lot of people think that there's a code here. Codes are another way to say things literally that you don't actually want to say. During war times, coded messages are sent that mean something to the hearer, but they won't mean something to the people in between. So a lot of people have imagined, so two possibilities here. A lot of people have imagined that John needed to sort of sneak this letter past Romans, and that he might have been persecuted if he had written what he really meant, but that the people in all of the churches would have understood. They knew how to break the code. They understood what he meant. That's doesn't make a lot of sense. And most of that is because a lot of the language in Revelation that we think of as coded language is hilariously transparent. Nobody is going to be fooled by using the word Babylon instead of the word Rome. Anybody who picked this up during that time is going to know exactly what John meant when he talked about Babylon. He's talking about Rome. I mean, basically. And so this idea that it's all coded language and that we just don't have the code anymore, let's not think about that. If he was writing in coded language, it was a really, really bad code. Now, the other way, of course, to think that some people think about it is that the code is for us and that John wrote something that would only be understood way, way later on. And only we in the 20th and 21st century have the ability now to understand what the code is. Now we understand what they're talking about. Now, that doesn't make any sense either. Um, for the simple reason that this made it into the Bible. People thought this was important. People thought that this gave hope, that this gave meaning to their life. There were lots of other books, probably a lot like Revelation, that were written at the time. Um, but Revelation made it in. This was important to people. And so it wouldn't have made any sense for John to write a code that only we are now interpreting. And it wouldn't make sense for John to write a code that only the people at the time were interpreting. There are a couple of things, especially that famous number 666, that maybe we could consider to be a code. We'll talk about those when we get there. But in general, we're not really looking at a code. For anything that you might consider a code, what I want you to do instead is to use the word symbol. And here's why. I want you to think about a particular symbol in our day and age. I want you to think about the American flag. Now, the American flag is a symbol. That's a pretty good way to put it, but it's not a code. If we were to say that the American flag was a code, then we would talk about what the 13 stripes meant, what the 50 stars meant, why there's blue, why there's red, why there's white, the meanings of all these different stripes and colors. We might talk about when you're folding the flag, there's some lore behind the number of folds that are in the flag and what each fold means. Now, all of that is absolutely true, but if I were just to come at you at any time and say, what does the flag mean? What is it a symbol of? You would have a very different answer. Well, it represents America. It represents American interests. It represents, probably something that's important today. It represents freedom or democracy or something like that. At different times and waved in different places, it can mean entirely different things. An American flag at Iwo Jima is different than an American flag above the White House, for instance. And so, in that sense, symbols can mean lots of different things that are all kind of related. And so, to go back to the use of the word Babylon, Babylon is a good symbol. Yes, for Rome, which is probably what everyone would have thought of, but man, does it not work to talk about any human empire, especially a degraded or fancy or rich human empire. There's a lot of use. But a lot of the language that John uses is not even just symbolic or coded or anything like this. He's drawing pictures, and the pictures are like art. They can mean a lot of different things, and we can draw a lot of different interpretations from them. And there's not always going to be a 1-to-1 relationship between what is written and something in the real world. They're not always just going to be instantly connected by that. Sometimes we just have to spend time with the pictures and think about, well, frankly, what do they mean for us? Um, it's 8:33. I think that's probably where I want to leave it off for today. But I do want to say a few things. First of all, if you go to the description of this YouTube video, or not YouTube video, Facebook video, although maybe you're watching it on YouTube later. There is a reading guide and kind of a syllabus. I'm calling this week 0, and that gives people the chance to sort of hop on later. As always in my classes, the most important thing is going to be that you read and that you read regularly and that you read carefully. And so not only do I have a list of when to read for what class, but I also have what I call my 7 guides to interpretation of the Bible. So definitely read that. Another really big thing, um, people come to Revelation with a lot of different expectations. I need your questions. I need your thoughts. You don't necessarily have to come up with anything right now, but I want to know. So call me at the church. Send me an email. Write a comment on this video. If you're coming to church right now, talk to me after service. Just anytime. I want to know, what do you want to know about Revelation? Um, Part of the reason that I say this is because um, I was fascinated when I was in seminary that there's a whole group of people that were traumatized by Revelation movies back, especially during like the 70s and 80s, but even into the modern day, to the point where in one of the famous Revelation movies, there's this really gruesome scene involving a young boy and a red balloon. I'll get into it later, perhaps, but just mentioning the red balloon scene to some people, they go, oh my gosh, I've forgotten all about that. That was the most terrifying thing and so sad and scary. And I never heard of this before. But so a lot of people have a lot of different, I don't want to say baggage, but a lot of different history with the book of Revelation. And I want to know where you all are coming from and what it is that you want to know. And so, even more than in some of my other studies, it's going to be really important for me to hear that from you all. So, as always, I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, get a drink of water, take a breather, and then if you all have any questions or any thoughts or comments or anything you want to share, post them now, and I'll answer those and talk about those as soon as I get my voice back a little bit from talking into a camera for half an hour straight. Hmm. Debbie Carter and Kelly Marshall came in a little while ago, and both Kelly is sending me her hand. Hi, Kelly. And Debbie says hi. Hi, Debbie. So good to see both of you. Oh, here's Paige Turner. She says, how do you feel about the angle of seeing Revelation as a blueprint for how we are supposed to conduct our liturgies? That is not an angle that I'm particularly familiar with. Um, so if you, yeah, that's, um, I mean, of course, there are throughout the different books of prophecy and the different like apocalypses in the Bible. It's where you get phrases like "Holy, holy, holy is the Lamb, the Lord, the God Almighty." Things that we do sometimes say in communion liturgies, um, um, and so on. But as a blueprint for how we are supposed to conduct our liturgies in general, I don't have much of a comment on that just because I'm not familiar with that angle. Um, so you'll have to say more. We are going to be taking 1 week off during this class, and that's going to be Ash Wednesday, which is February 17th. We will let you all know how we're going to be celebrating Ash Wednesday pretty soon. Scott and I are still working out the details on that because we said it's going to be kind of hard to impose ashes on people this year with the need to socially distance. So we'll have to figure that out later. I'm going to hang around a little bit more if anyone else has any questions or thoughts. And I'm going to see if there's anything else that I meant to say that I didn't. I think anything else that I want to talk about, we'll get to in the course of the study itself. But like I said, definitely want you all to hop in later with your questions and your comments and also again just like kind of like what you want to learn from this class. What draws you or even repels you from Revelation. One of the interesting things about Revelation is that there were several important church fathers throughout the years who actually wanted to basically take it out of the canon. One of those actually is Martin Luther, who he basically looked at it and said, I can't find anything good in this. There's no grace, there's no reconciliation, there's no nothing. And Martin Luther just about wanted to take it out, but he kind of got shouted down. John Wesley, in his commentary on the New Testament, because he wrote commentary for the entire New Testament, but he didn't write a commentary on Revelation. He basically took another guy's works and then just copied and pasted and said, I don't understand this book. This guy seems to know what he's talking about. I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying he's wrong, but I don't have anything to say, so I'm just going to say what this guy is saying. Linda Rule says, good evening. Looking forward to this class. Linda, that's kind of you to say. Glad you've dropped in today. Lots of people that have liked the videos. That's really nice. All right. Well, I think I'm probably going to go ahead and wrap it up. Don't need to stay on or keep anybody here. So if you're watching this later on, if you're not watching this, on Wednesday night, you can still comment, and I should be able to see those comments later on and respond to them. Either I'll write you a message back, or I'll mention something in the next video. But hope you all will stay for this one. Revelation, it repels a lot of people, but I think it's really fascinating to study. And there are some really, really great things to learn. So I hope you'll stay. And Chantel says me and Bella are here. Good to hear from you, Chantel, and tell Bella I hope she's doing well. All right, you guys. I'm gonna log off for now. Grace and peace to you all. Thanks so much for joining us here tonight. Hope to be talking to you all soon. Night night.